Okay, great, great. So that is our topic for today. Advanced care planning and healthcare consent is kind of what makes up the basis for this entire presentation. Although we did want to bring in an element of the environment that we're kind of working and living within in regards to this pandemic that has us all finding that we're living life in a very different way. So just to start off, advanced care planning and healthcare consent is really about having important conversations. And what I like to do is I like to break it down into 3 different types of conversations. So the first one is just advanced care planning. And advanced care planning in and of itself can be done by anybody, whether you have an illness or a disease that has a trajectory for life, whether you're 100% healthy, doesn't really matter. Advanced care planning is really important for all of us to be able to understand, be informed about, and engage with our families about. So advanced care planning is really about thinking, what if something happened? So it's really about, what if something happened to me? What if I was in a car accident? What if I had something happen to me like a stroke? And that can happen to someone who's completely healthy. Or maybe someone has already had a diagnosis provided to them. Maybe it's congestive heart failure. Maybe it's dementia. It's Alzheimer's, something like that, where you have to think about, what if something is going to happen to me in the future? And really what you want to do is you want to look inside yourself, think about, what are the things I value? What are my wishes and what are my beliefs? What are the things that are important to me? And then the other very important part of advanced care planning is understanding that if you ever got to a point in time where you couldn't speak for yourself and you couldn't make decisions for yourself, someone else is going to have to do that for you. That person is called your substitute decision maker. And you'll often hear people talk about a POA, same kind of person. This person who has power of attorney over your healthcare. Every one of us in Ontario actually has an automatic substitute decision maker. And I will go through that in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. And I think it's really important when we talk about our future for healthcare, knowing who that substitute decision maker is. Sometimes it's not the person that we would want to have making decisions for us. And so we have to think about, what would I do if I needed to change that? So that's one of the reasons why advanced care planning in and of itself is super important. So the next important conversation is around goals of care. And goals of care is actually about, what if this happened? Goals of care conversations have to happen within what we would call a healthcare context or an illness context. So I could have talked to one of my healthcare providers about what I wanted for my, expressing a wish of what I would want to have happen if I wasn't sick or if I didn't have something wrong with me already. For people who are these days coming into the emergency department with symptoms of COVID-19, other people who are just generally unwell, those are the kinds of conversations that you can engage in at that time. And it's about understanding what the disease or illness is, understanding what the prognosis looks like, and then again, what are the goals that someone has for themselves within that illness context? What are their fears and what's important to them? And then lastly, the important conversation is the healthcare consent. And the healthcare consent is really looking at, this is happening right now. And this is where an actual healthcare decision has to be made in the moment. And what happens is that either the patient, the person themselves, or their substitute decision maker can use those other conversations, that advanced care planning conversation or that goals of care conversation, to guide that decision. And it's really more important than ever that your substitute decision maker, your family and your healthcare team understand what matters to you most in the event that you become seriously ill. And again, that can be something that you're already, an illness or disease process you're already dealing with, or it could be something that comes upon you fairly quickly, such as a virus or flu, or as we talked about, COVID-19. So in a nutshell, those are the three things we're going to focus on today. So again, advanced care planning is not consent to treatment. And advanced care planning actually can only be done by a capable individual. So that means someone who doesn't have the capacity to make decisions for themselves can't really engage in advanced care planning. But if they are capable, it's a great time to plan for a time when they can't make their own decisions. And again, it's based on what if something happened. I often will have conversations with my husband to be able to say, hey, if this ever happened, we certainly had these conversations around COVID-19. If this ever happened to me, remember, these are some of the things that I feel are important to me if I were to get sick. Another family member of mine is dealing with a disease process that will bring them to end of life, and we've had those conversations. What would you want to have happen when, if you got to that point? So again, the most important part about advanced care planning is identifying the automatic substitute decision maker and being able to have a conversation with them about your wishes, values, and beliefs. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Bear with me here. So this here is what's called our substitute decision maker hierarchy. This is where we get our information about who would be the right person for us as healthcare professionals or healthcare providers. Who would be the person that we need to be talking to if the patient or person in front of us can't make a decision for themselves or can't speak for themselves. And if you look at this, this chart, the very top three in yellow are those substitute decision makers that are legally appointed. However, that's not where we start. So that's not where we start. We actually start with the green section. And the green section, so your spouse or partner would be the first person who would be your automatic substitute decision maker. If you are married or if you are have been living with someone for a certain period of time, they are considered your spouse or your partner. And that's who the healthcare providers would go to make that, to have that conversation about what would be their expressed wish and maybe make a healthcare decision on your behalf. If you didn't have a spouse or a partner, the next box says parents or children. So if you have parents, then they would be the next people that would make a decision for you, and any children that you would have. And this is where it can get a little bit complicated, because if there's someone who has both parents living as well as children, they have to make those decisions together. So you can see where it's really important to start having these conversations and understanding who the substitute decision makers are prior to getting to a point where you're not capable. If you don't have a spouse or partner, you don't have parents or children, then what they'll do is they'll look to your siblings. So if you have siblings who are still with us and are still capable, then if you couldn't speak for yourself, the healthcare providers would be looking to try to reach them to be able to make decisions for you and have conversations about healthcare. And barring no siblings, they would look for any other relative. If there was a person who didn't have any of these people and hadn't appointed anybody as an attorney for personal care, then there is the public guardian and trustee, who would be the substitute decision maker of last resort. And although we sometimes have to look to this person to help make a decision for someone, we really try to find someone within the family to help in those cases. So one of the most important things you need to realize is that if you've realized who your substitute decision maker is, and it's really not the person that you would want to have making decisions for you, that can be changed. And what you do is you think about, who is the person that I would want to have make decisions on my behalf? Who would I want speaking for me? Who would support the decisions that are the wishes that I've talked to them about concerning my health? And if you find that it's someone who is not on this this hierarchy, then all you have to do is you have to write down who that is. And what happens is that becomes a document called an attorney for power of attorney for personal care, POAPC. And that becomes a document that legally is binding that person to being your substitute decision maker. And it's not something that has to be done through a lawyer. It's something that can be done as simple as writing down who you would want that person or persons to be, dating it, signing it, and having two people witness it. And there's a lot of information. I'll give you a very good resource for you to go to if you had any additional questions about that and wanted to look into that a little bit more. There's a lot of help on the internet to get you started, as well as you can contact me anytime. So a couple things. So I just want to make sure I went over this. Everyone has an automatic substitute decision maker. If it's going to be changed, there must be a power of attorney for personal care document. We often try to stay away from terminology such as next of kin, POA, and emergency contact, because those people can be very different than who your substitute decision maker is. Because if someone's in hospital and maybe they have a neighbor who's going to pick up some items from their home, their slippers or their robe, and bring it to the hospital, that could be someone who is their primary contact because they live close by and they're able to bring things, versus someone who would make a healthcare decision, which is your substitute decision maker. So you might hear these terms, next of kin, POA, and emergency contact, but it's really important to realize that it's not always who the substitute decision maker is going to be. So preparing your substitute decision maker. Again, this is around having that conversation. A sudden illness such as COVID-19 that can happen at any time and leave you unable to make a healthcare decision for yourself. So what you really want to do is you really want to be able to have a conversation while you're well, while you're able to, with your substitute decision maker. And some of the starters that we suggest are, you can say to them, you know what, I've been thinking about my risk of becoming very sick if I were to become infected with the coronavirus, and hoped we could talk about what's important to me. I'd like to talk to you about this. That could be one starter. Another is that I heard that so-and-so got sick and ended up in the intensive care unit. His daughter had to make decisions about his health care. It made me realize I need to talk to you about this. And although those are very scripted, and you may certainly not, necessarily be reading it word for word, you can see that there is a way to bring up the conversation. It can be difficult. It's very emotional to think about what would happen to us if we couldn't speak for ourselves, what would happen to us if we got very sick. But again, it's important that you have that conversation with them so that they are understanding of what your wishes might be. One of the other things is knowing what matters most to you will support them in the best position to speak on your behalf. Having these discussions means your substitute decision maker may not be left to struggle with the possible guilt and anxiety of having to guess what decisions you would have wanted them to make. And we have certainly seen this. I've certainly seen this in my career, especially when hard decisions have to be made around stopping treatments or allowing someone to die a natural death. So the goals of care conversations, again, these have to be had within an illness, disease, or healthcare context. The patient has usually an illness or disease that has a trajectory towards possible end of life, or at least a healthcare, something that will show a decline in their health, where decisions might have to be made. And these are value-based discussions to help the person and the substitute decision maker understand the illness and what the treatment options are. It helps the substitute decision maker to make future healthcare decisions about what the patient might want to achieve. And again, it's kind of in that context of what if this happens? And one of the conversations that I've seen this used most effectively is around whether it's an illness or maybe some type of disease such as Alzheimer's or dementia, when you know that the trajectory means that the patient might not be able to take food in orally. And sometimes you might want to have a conversation about, if that ever happened to me, you know, maybe talking about what would it look like? Would I want to have a feeding tube put in? Is that something that would be important to me, to be able to continue to live with a feeding tube, be well nourished, and continue my life? Or it could be something like, you know what, I've thought about that, and when it gets to a point in time where I'm not able to eat anymore, I don't think I would want a feeding tube. And again, it just helps that substitute decision maker and your healthcare team to really see what's important to you, so that if and when the time came and your substitute decision maker or yourself had to make that decision, it's already been thought of, it's already been processed a little bit. You're not making it in a time of crisis or feeling pressured, and you have the information where you can make the decision and feel good that it was what that person wanted. But important to note that a goal of care conversation is not a consent for treatment, because it's not something that's happening right now. But consent is a decision. A consent is a decision by a person or a substitute decision maker to accept or refuse a treatment or a plan of treatment after the patient or incapable person's substitute decision maker is provided with all the information about their illness and possible treatment options. Healthcare practitioners are required to get full informed consent before providing any treatment, except under emergency circumstances. And at the same time, it could be about providing a treatment, or it could be about not providing a treatment. Consent does not have to be written, and it can be revoked at any time. So one of the examples that I've been using is if someone arrives in the hospital emergency department with something maybe like COVID-like symptoms or another illness, or an acute crisis such as a heart attack, depending on what's occurring, you or your substitute decision maker may need to actually make a decision about what's to be done. How much treatment would you want? For example, what medications might help you or hurt you? Would you want ventilation, a tracheostomy, or how little intervention would you want? Would you want comfort measures only? Sometimes there won't be many options, and that will be something that the healthcare provider will talk to you about as well. When the chances of recovery are very slim, when the treatments such as ventilation or cardiopulmonary resuscitation will not bring about a good effect or might cause harm, the doctor may tell you this and may not actually offer it. So the Healthcare Consent Act is really the legalese for what supports consent within our healthcare system. So a healthcare provider must have informed consent from the patient or substitute decision maker for any treatment or withdrawal of treatment. And some of the things that must be consistent within the consent is to have the person make sure they understand the illness and what the recommended treatment is. They must have relevant information provided to them, such as what's an alternative to what the proposed treatment is, and the outcome of acceptance or refusal of treatment, which means if you accept the treatment or refuse the treatment, they need to be able to tell you what that would mean in terms of what the outcome would be. The decision has to be voluntary. It cannot be obtained through misrepresentation or fraud. And what that usually means is that they can't tell you just all of the good things that they want to be able to provide to you, or give you any false information about what the outcomes might be. And the patient must be mentally capable of making decisions regarding the treatment. And when we talk about the ability to make a decision for yourself, someone needs to have the capacity to consent, and that's the mental capacity to consent. And a person is capable to consent if they actually can understand the full information that's relevant to making the decision about the treatment, and that they can appreciate the reasonably foreseeable consequences of a decision, which means that if a physician or a healthcare practitioner is talking to you and asking for consent, and they've offered you treatment, and you can understand what that treatment means and what that outcome looks like, and that's what you choose, then that's informed consent. If the above criteria is not met, then the healthcare provider moves on to the substitute decision maker. Sometimes someone will come into hospital, or there'll be a conversation in someone's home, and we think that the patient has capacity to consent, and as we're talking to them, we realize that they don't. And it's really our obligation to be able to make that assessment in the moment, and if we need to, move on to a substitute decision maker to be able to make that decision for them. And I think a really important part to talk about is that consent cannot come from a piece of paper. And so in the past, there were things like living wills and advance directives, and even some lawyers still these days will talk about this when people come visit them. What would you want to have happen to you if such and such happened? And although people might write down what they want, I don't ever want to be on a ventilator, I don't ever want to be resuscitated, they might be very firm about that. Any healthcare practitioner or physician, nurse practitioner, whoever is looking after you, cannot take that piece of paper as consent. What they will do is they will find the substitute decision maker, and they will be able to use whatever's written down as an expressed wish. And that should be helpful in aiding the substitute decision maker in helping to make a decision about how to move forward, whether it's for treatment or removal of treatment. So this is a little bit of a complicated slide. And really what it is it's just kind of showing that a capable person can participate in advanced care planning. And that doesn't have to be within any type of illness or health event. That can be just anybody at any time. Then what happens is someone will have an event. They'll have a diagnosis of an illness or disease. They'll have some type of healthcare event. And then goals of care discussion will be held. And moving from goals of care discussion into consent has to be done by a capable person or a substitute decision maker. And based on what the consent is, there's a treatment or plan initiated. So just a few extras. Goals of care conversations can become healthcare decisions, especially when an illness is causing a rapid decline in health status. So again, someone might walk into a hospital emergency department having signs of an illness such as COVID. Some goals of care conversations might have to be had then. And as that patient is there in the emergency department, there's a possibility of them getting worse and having someone actually needing to make a healthcare decision about what are we going to do next. Any new issue needs to have their own conversation and their own consent. And we see this often when we talk about maybe someone who's in a long-term care home and they have, let's say, they have a congestive heart failure, and they've decided that they don't want any more treatment for their congestive heart failure, that they are going to be provided comfort measures until end of life, but then they end up falling and breaking their hip. That broken hip needs to have a conversation about, this has happened right now, and what would we like to do about it? Is it something that you want to have treatment for, perhaps go to the hospital and have some surgery that will help with pain and symptom management, or do you want to continue on comfort measures only? So any new issue needs to have a new conversation and a new consent. And until recently, if a physician saw no benefit for CPR, but a patient or family wanted CPR, then the default would be to provide the CPR and work on a conflict resolution. However, that's recently changed, and now if a physician does not feel that CPR or some type of a treatment plan would be beneficial or may cause harm, it's not something that they have to offer. And that's a really important piece when you hear people talking about a conflict between what the physician and what the family wants. And I'm certainly open to having more conversations about that if you have any questions, because it's that one can be a little bit confusing and a little bit daunting, but we can certainly walk you through it. And I just bring you to this slide. This is the best resource I could offer you if you had any questions or wanted to do some of your own research on this. And it's the Speak Up Ontario website. And not only do they have great information about advanced care planning and goals of care and healthcare consent, but they have a brand new section just speaking about COVID. And it really breaks down into information sheets for patients and caregivers, as well as goals of care conversation guides for community patients and patients in hospital. It's really a wealth of information on there. One of the things, the reason why it's Speak Up Ontario is that as a country, there is advanced care planning across Canada. However, every province has a different set of guidelines, and every province has a different legal framework that they work under for healthcare consent. And so Ontario will have its own rules, different rules than maybe British Columbia. There are some provinces who do use documents such as advanced directives. So it's really important for us to keep under the Ontario legal framework in order to make sure that the conversations we're having and the decisions we're making are all legal. And then there's a last slide, is just a couple more resources, a little bit more detailed information if it's something that you wanted to dig deeper into and perhaps get more